The rain in rural Oregon didn't just fall. It punished the earth with a relentless fury that turned the dirt roads of Josephine County into slick ribbons of mud and drowned out every other sound in the world. For 15-year-old Lily Brennan, the deafening drumming on the tin roof of her isolated farmhouse was supposed to be comforting, a familiar lullaby from a childhood spent in the shadow of the Cascade Mountains. Tonight it felt like a warning. Her mother, Rebecca, was working a grueling double shift at the regional hospital, covering for a colleague who had called in sick. Lily had done this before, stayed alone in the old two-story farmhouse that sat a quarter-mile back from the main road, surrounded by dense pine forest on three sides. The doors were dead-bolted. The alarm system, though ancient and prone to false triggers, was armed. She had her phone. She had the number for the sheriff's dispatch programmed in. She had her older brother Connor's direct line saved under favorites, even though he was stationed at the military reserve base 20 minutes away and rarely answered after 9. She had everything she needed to feel safe. Everything except the one thing that actually mattered when the world decided to turn against you. She had no way of knowing that tonight's safety was an illusion about to shatter like glass. Lily was standing in the kitchen, the glow of her phone screen illuminating her face in the darkness when the power grid finally surrendered to the storm. The house plunged into absolute suffocating blackness. The refrigerator's low hum died. The ancient wall clock stopped ticking. Even the small green light on the alarm panel by the back door went dark, leaving her in a silence so complete it felt like the world itself had stopped breathing. She froze, the cold glass of water trembling in her hand. Her eyes struggled to adjust, searching for any sliver of light in the consuming void. Outside, the storm continued, its assault sheets of rain hammering against the windows with such violence it sounded like handfuls of gravel being thrown at the house. Then she heard it, a sound that cut through the noise of the rain like a knife through silk. Sharp, deliberate, violent. The unmistakable crash of shattering glass from the mudroom at the back of the house. Not a branch blown loose by the wind, not a piece of debris carried by the storm. This was the sound of intention, the sound of someone forcing their way inside. Panic flooded her system, cold and electric shooting through her veins like ice water. The glass slipped from her numb fingers and hit the kitchen rug with a muted thud, water spreading in a dark stain she couldn't see. Her breath caught in her throat, sharp and painful. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but her legs felt like they belonged to someone else, heavy and unresponsive. Move. The word echoed in her mind. Move. Now. She didn't scream. Some deep primal part of her brain clamped her mouth shut. Understanding that sound meant discovery, and discovery meant danger. She turned and ran from the kitchen, her socks sliding on the old oak floors, as she scrambled toward the narrow staircase that led to the second floor. Her hands found the banister in the darkness, fingers wrapping around the worn wood with desperate strength as she pulled herself up the stairs two at a time. Behind her, somewhere in the back of the house, she heard the heavy crunch of boots on broken glass. Footsteps, slow, methodical, the sound of someone who knew they had time, someone who knew she was alone. Then came the voice, male, slurred, thick with something dark and chemical and wrong. Rebecca. The word drifted up through the darkness like smoke, lazy and venomous. Lily's blood turned to ice in her veins. She knew that voice. She had heard it twice before, both times standing on the front porch, while her mother called the sheriff, both times filled with rage and accusations about money-owed debts, unpaid respect demanded. Warren Holloway, the drifter, the ex-convict with the dead eyes and the scarred knuckles, and the reputation that made even the tough loggers at the general store cross to the other side of the road when they saw him coming. "I know you're in here, Rebecca." His voice echoed through the empty house, bouncing off the walls of the living room. "You think you can ignore me? You think you're better than me? You owe me, woman. You owe me, and tonight we settle accounts." Lily reached the top of the stairs and bolted down the hallway toward her bedroom, her heart hammering against her ribs so hard she thought they might crack. She threw herself through her bedroom door and didn't stop, didn't even pause to close it behind her. She went straight for her closet, yanking open the bifold doors and diving into the dark space beyond, dragging a heavy pile of her mother's winter coats over her trembling body as she pulled the slatted door shut. The smell of mothballs and old perfume filled her nose, mixing with the metallic taste of fear in her mouth. She pressed herself into the corner, making herself as small as possible, and clamped both hands over her mouth to stifle the sound of her own ragged breathing. Downstairs, Warren Holloway was no longer calling out. She could hear him moving through the house now, his boots heavy on the hardwood floors. The crash of furniture being overturned, the smash of picture frames being swept off tables. He was searching, destroying, working his way through the first floor with the methodical patience of someone who had done this before, someone who understood that fear was a tool and time was a weapon. Lily's phone was still in her hand, clutched so tightly her knuckles had gone white. The screen's glare felt as bright as a spotlight in the suffocating darkness of the closet, so she immediately dimmed it to the lowest setting, her fingers shaking so badly she could barely work the controls. Battery at 42%. No signal bars. The storm had taken out the cell tower, or the power outage had killed the local repeater, or God himself had decided she didn't deserve to be saved. She needed her brother. Connor was tough, smart, trained. He had a truck that could handle the muddy roads. He was only 15, maybe 20 minutes away if he drove fast. He would know what to do. He would come for her. With trembling fingers, she opened her messaging app. The blue-white glow of the screen made her eyes water. She could hear Warren downstairs getting closer to the base of the stairs, the sound of a heavy boot kicking the refrigerator. A string of curse words muffled but violent. Come out, Sophie." The voice drifted up again, closer now. "I'm going to tear this place to the studs. I'm going to find what you took from me, and then we're going to have a conversation you won't forget." Tears blurred Lily's vision as she tried to remember Connor's number. She had it memorized, had made herself learn it after her mother insisted that she needed to know important numbers by heart in case her phone died or got lost. 5550148. She repeated it in her mind like a prayer as her thumb hovered over the keypad. But her hands were shaking. Her whole body was shaking. The adrenaline flooding her system made her fingers feel thick and clumsy, like they belonged to someone else. She tapped in the numbers, watching them appear on the screen through the blur of tears. 5, 5, 5, 0, 1, 4. Her thumb slipped, just for a fraction of a second, just enough. Instead of hitting the 8, she hit the 7. She didn't notice. She was too busy typing the message, moving as slowly and carefully as she could to avoid making any sound that might give away her location. The screen seemed impossibly bright, like a beacon that would draw Warren straight to her hiding place. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with agonizing slowness. Each letter felt like it took an eternity. Each tap of the screen sounded to her terror-sharpened ears like a gunshot in the silence. He broke in. "He's downstairs. I'm in the closet. Please help Connor." So scared. She hit send without reading it back, without checking the number, without doing anything except praying that her brother would see it and understand and come. The little arrow icon turned into a delivered check mark. The message vanished from her screen, shooting out into the digital void carried by whatever fragment of cell signal managed to punch through the storm. 30 miles away, the atmosphere couldn't have been more different. Inside the Iron Horse, a heavily fortified bar that served as the local charter clubhouse for the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club, the air was thick with cigarette smoke, the smell of worn leather, and the heavy bass of classic rock bleeding from an old jukebox that hadn't been updated since 1987. This was a place where the outside world didn't matter, where the rules were different, where brotherhood was sealed in ink and blood and the roar of V-twin engines. Everett Bishop, known to every living soul in the life, simply as Reaper, was sitting at the corner of the bar, nursing a black coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. Reaper was a towering man in his late 40s, 6'3" in his boots, with arms covered in a chaotic tapestry of faded ink that told the story of a life lived hard and without apology. A serpent coiled up his right forearm, a grinning skull with roses for eyes stretched across his left bicep. The words, "Death before dishonor," ran in Gothic script across his knuckles. On his back, worn like a badge of honor and a warning to the world, was a legendary Winged Death's head patch that marked him as a fully patched member of the most notorious motorcycle club in America. He was a veteran of the club, a man who had seen the darkest corners of the world and navigated them with a ruthless code of survival that had kept him alive when better men had fallen. He had scars that told stories he would never speak aloud. He had ghosts that followed him everywhere he went, whispering in his ear in the small hours of the morning when sleep wouldn't come. The worst ghost was a girl, 27 years old now, somewhere on the East Coast, living a life he knew nothing about. Magnolia, his daughter. He hadn't seen her in 12 years, not since her mother had packed up and left while he was doing a 2-year stint in county for assault. The last conversation he'd had with her, she'd been 15, crying, telling him she hated him, telling him he was a terrible father who cared more about the club than his own family. She'd been right. That was the part that hurt the most. She had been absolutely, completely right. Reaper stared at the neon beer signs reflecting off the wet pavement outside the barred windows, watching the rain streak down the glass in rivulets that looked like tears. His burner phone, a prepaid device that he kept for club business in emergencies, sat on the scarred wooden bar next to his knuckles. Only a handful of people had this number. Brothers in the club, trusted associates, people who understood that when you called this number, it meant something serious. The phone buzzed. Just once. A short, sharp vibration that cut through the low rumble of conversation and the steady thump of the music. Reaper frowned. He picked up the phone, the screen illuminating his hardened, bearded face in harsh, blue-white light. The light caught the deep lines around his eyes, the gray threading through his beard, the scar that ran from his left eyebrow to his cheekbone from a bottle fight in Reno 10 years back. He read the message. Once. Then again. Then a third time, his eyes narrowing as his brain tried to make sense of the words glowing on the screen. He broke in. He's downstairs. I'm in the closet. Please help Connor. So scared. Reaper's first instinct was simple and immediate. Delete it. Throw the phone in the trash. This was a setup. Had to be. Some rival crew trying to bait them into a raid. Some local cop with more ambition than sense trying to manufacture probable cause. The words were too perfect, too designed to trigger a response. Nobody actually texted like that in a real emergency. People called 911. They didn't send carefully punctuated pleas to random numbers. But something stopped his thumb before it could hit the delete button. Something about the wording, the desperation in those last two words. So scared. Not, I'm scared. Not scared. So scared. Like a child, like someone barely holding on to the last threads of control. It didn't read like a rival biker. Those guys talked in threats, in insults, and thinly veiled violence. This read like genuine terror, like someone who had run out of options and was clinging to hope with bleeding fingernails. Reaper tapped his heavy silver skull ring against the wooden bar, the sound barely audible over the music. His mind raced through possibilities, scenarios, angles. The easy thing would be to ignore it. The smart thing would be to delete it and forget it ever happened. But the right thing, the thing that code he lived by demanded, was to at least find out if this was real. He stood up his massive frame, casting a shadow over the pool table where two other members were playing 8-ball for beer money. His leather cut creaked as he moved the patches on the back, catching the dim light. The Death's Head grinned at nothing. Bull. The name came out as a low gravel rumble that immediately commanded the attention of every man in the room. When Reaper spoke, people listened. When he used that tone, they listened fast. Marcus Garrison, known universally as Bull, looked up from his shot. Bull was the sergeant-at-arms for the charter, a position that meant he was responsible for security discipline and making sure that anyone who crossed the club understood the weight of their mistake. He was a mountain of a man, wide-shouldered and thick-necked, with a gray beard that made him look like a biker version of a Norse god. His arms were the size of most men's thighs. His hands looked like they could crush concrete. "What's up, brother?" Bull's voice was a low rumble like distant thunder. Reaper walked over and handed him the phone without a word. Bull wiped chalk dust from his hands onto his denim jeans and took the device, squinting at the screen. His heavy brow furrowed deep into his forehead, creating valleys of shadow in the dim light. The clack of pool balls stopped. The atmosphere in the bar shifted subtly the way it always did when the sergeant at arms stopped what he was doing to pay attention to something. Bull read the message once, twice. Then he looked up at Reaper, his expression unreadable. "Who the hell is Connor?" "Nobody I know." Reaper crossed his arms, the leather of his cut creaking. "Wrong number, has to be." Vincent Hayes, a younger member they called Crusher because of what he'd done to a rival's car with a baseball bat, stepped up behind Bull to look over his shoulder. Crusher was heavily muscled, built like a middleweight fighter, with tattoos that ran up his neck and disappeared into his hairline. He was 34 but looked 40, the life aging him in dog years. "Could be a prank," Crusher offered, though his voice lacked conviction. "Kids with phones, you know how it is." "Maybe." Reaper's jaw was tight, a muscle jumping in his cheek. "But if it ain't?" Bull stared at the screen for a long moment. The Hells Angels were not a neighborhood watch. They were not good Samaritans. They lived outside the boundaries of polite society, governed by their own laws and their own brotherhood. They didn't get involved in civilian disputes unless it affected the club directly, unless someone crossed a line that demanded a response. But there was an unwritten rule, a strange paradox in their outlaw code that most people didn't understand and wouldn't believe if you told them. You didn't let women or children suffer if you could stop it. You didn't turn your back on someone crying out in genuine terror. It wasn't about being heroes. It was about being men, about having a code that meant something in a world that seemed to have forgotten what honor looked like. "Only one way to find out," Bull grunted. He handed the phone back to Reaper, his expression hardening into something focused and dangerous. "Ping them back. Tell them they got the wrong number. But ask where they are." Reaper nodded. He took the phone and quickly typed with his thick thumbs, the letters appearing slowly on the screen. "Not Connor. Wrong number. Who is this? Where are you?" He hit send and waited, the phone warm in his palm. The bar had gone quiet now, the music still playing, but everyone's attention focused on the corner where Reaper stood with his phone. Word had spread in that silent way it always did when something serious was happening. Brothers drifted over from the back room, from the bathroom, from the small kitchen where someone had been making grilled cheese sandwiches on a hot plate. 30 miles away in the pitch-black confines of her closet, Lily Brennan's phone vibrated violently against her thigh. The sudden buzz made her bite down on her hand to keep from crying out. She could hear Warren downstairs, his heavy boots ascending the stairs, now each step a slow drumbeat of approaching doom. "Sophie!" Warren's voice echoed up the stairwell. He was using her mother's middle name, the one her grandmother had called her. "I know you're up here. I can feel you. You think you can hide from me. I'm going to find you, and when I do, you're going to tell me where you put my property." Lily's hands shook as she pulled the phone from her pocket, the screen blazing bright in the darkness. She had to angle it away from the slats of the closet door, terrified that the light would give her away. Her heart dropped into her stomach when she saw the message. Not Connor. The reality hit her like a physical blow. She had dialed wrong. The one lifeline she thought she had, the one person she'd reached out to in her moment of absolute terror, didn't exist. She was completely and utterly alone. A sob built in the back of her throat, thick and suffocating. She wanted to give up, wanted to curl into a ball and just wait for whatever was going to happen. But Warren's footsteps were getting closer, moving down the hallway toward her room, and the sheer primal fear of what he would do when he found her forced her fingers back to the keyboard. She didn't care who was on the other end anymore. She didn't care if it was a prank or a wrong number or some stranger who would think she was crazy. She just needed someone, anyone, to know what was happening. She needed to leave a record. She needed to not disappear without a trace. Her fingers moved across the screen, tears falling freely now, dripping onto the phone's surface and making the screen shimmer. Please don't leave me. Name is Lily. Man named Warren Holloway broke in. Has crowbar. Wants my mom. 4242 Pinecrest Road. Call police. Please. She hit send and then did something she hadn't done since she was 6 years old. She prayed, please, God, please, God, please, God, let someone help. Let someone come, please. Don't let him find me, please, please, please. At the Iron Horse Reaper's phone buzzed again. Every man in the bar turned to look at him. He read the incoming message aloud, his voice cutting through the sudden silence like a blade. The moment he said the name Warren Holloway, a dark murmur rippled through the gathered bikers. Heads turned, eyes narrowed. Several men exchanged glances that spoke volumes. Holloway. Crusher spat the name like it left a bad taste in his mouth. That tweaker piece of garbage. He owes the club $2,000 from a bad deal last year. Heard he was losing his mind, harassing people out in the county. Bull's expression darkened. He looked at the clock on the wall, the ancient Budweiser clock, with the second hand that stuck every time it hit the 6. It was 11:42 at night. Storm outside was apocalyptic. Roads would be a nightmare. Read the address again, Bull commanded, his voice dropping to that tone that meant decisions were being made. 4242 Pinecrest Road, Reaper said. Pinecrest. Bull's eyes narrowed. That's up the ridge past the old mill. Barely 3 miles from here as the crow flies. Maybe 4 if we take the fire roads. Rico Martinez, a lean, scarred member they called Scar, leaned against the bar. Cops ain't gonna make it out there, man. Not in this mud. County dispatch is running a skeleton crew tonight, and I heard on the scanner earlier that a semi flipped on Route 9 blocking the only paved access road. They'd have to take the long way around through Grants Pass, take them an hour minimum. Holloway is high on his own supply, Crusher added, his fists clenching. Probably out of his mind. If he finds a 15-year-old girl in that house alone. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The grim reality hung heavy in the stale air of the bar, mixing with the smoke and the smell of leather and oil. Bolt didn't hesitate. The rough edges of his outlaw persona hardened into something intensely focused and lethal. He turned to the bartender, a grizzled old member who'd retired from riding but still kept the clubhouse. Lock the doors. Cut the music. The jukebox died mid-song, the sudden silence almost painful. Bull turned back to the room, raising his voice so it carried to every corner of the bar. Listen up. We got a situation. Warren Holloway is currently breaking into a house on Pinecrest. There's a teenage girl trapped inside, and the law ain't coming. Now, Holloway has outstanding club business anyway, but I ain't letting a kid get dragged into his mess on our doorstep. Men started moving before he even finished speaking. Stephen O'Connor, a wiry biker known as Patch because of the eye he'd lost in a bar fight, grabbed his heavy leather jacket from a bar stool. We riding, boss. We're riding. Bull's face was a mask of cold determination. He turned to Reaper. Tell the girl to stay put and stay quiet. Tell her help is coming. Reaper looked down at his phone. He felt a strange surge of something he hadn't felt in years. Something protective and fierce and angry. It was the same feeling he'd had the first time he'd held Magnolia as a newborn, tiny and fragile in his arms, and sworn to himself that nothing in this world would ever hurt her. He'd broken that promise. He'd failed his daughter in every way that mattered. But maybe, just maybe, he could keep it for someone else's kid. He quickly typed a response, his thick fingers surprisingly nimble on the small keyboard. Lily, do not make a sound. Do not leave the closet. We are 5 minutes away. He pocketed the phone, grabbed his heavy chain wallet from the bar, and zipped up his cut. The winged death's head on his back seemed to catch the dim light, the skull's empty eye sockets staring at nothing and everything. As 12 hardened men walked out of the Iron Horse and into the raging storm, the sound of motorcycle engines firing up was like thunder, a rolling barrage of mechanical fury that echoed off the surrounding buildings. Harleys modified for power and intimidation roared to life, their exhausts crackling and popping in the wet air. Reaper swung his leg over his bike, a black and chrome beast he'd built himself over the course of 3 years. He twisted the throttle, feeling the engine respond beneath him, like a living thing, all that contained violence just waiting to be unleashed. Rain hammered down on his leather cut, soaking through to his skin within seconds. But he didn't care. The cold focused him. The storm felt appropriate. Bull took point, his massive bike leading the pack out of the parking lot and onto the rain-slicked street. Behind him, the others fell into formation, a column of chrome and leather and fury cutting through the darkness. No lights except their headlights. No sirens. No announcements. Just the raw, primal sound of 12 heavy motorcycles pushing toward the red line engines, screaming in harmony as they tore through the storm. Inside the farmhouse on Pinecrest Road, the nightmare was escalating. Lily knelt in the dust and darkness of her closet, the heavy wool of her mother's winter coats pressing down on her like a suffocating weight. The scent of mothballs mixed with the metallic taste of fear in her mouth. Her phone battery icon had dipped into the red, 18% remaining. She stared at the last message on her screen, the words barely registering through the fog of terror that had settled over her mind. "We are 5 minutes away." She had no idea who "we" was. For all she knew, it was a group of teenagers playing a cruel joke. Or worse, someone connected to Warren coming to help him finish whatever he'd started. But it was the only thread of hope she had left to cling to, and she gripped it with everything she had. Outside the closet, Warren was no longer just searching. He was destroying. She could hear the rhythmic crash of his crowbar, taking out the framed photographs that lined the hallway walls. Family pictures, her school portraits, the photo of her and her mother at the coast last summer, both of them laughing, both of them happy and whole and safe. Smash, smash, smash. Each impact made her flinch. Each crash felt like a physical blow. He was moving methodically, working his way closer. His boots thudded heavily against the floorboards, a slow and terrible drumbeat. He was at the top of the stairs now. She could tell by the way the sound changed, the way his weight made the old house creak and settle. "This is a nice house, Rebecca," Warren taunted, his voice echoing in the dark corridor. The slurred quality had gotten worse. Whatever he was on, it was hitting him harder now. "Shame you won't be enjoying it much longer. You think you're better than me? You think you can just ignore me, steal from me?" He kicked open the door to her mother's bedroom with a crash that made Lily's heart stutter in her chest. She pressed her hands over her mouth, trying to muffle the sound of her own terrified breathing. Through the thin wall that separated her room from her mother's, she could hear him tearing the place apart. Drawers being yanked out and thrown against walls. The mattress being flipped, glass shattering. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the destruction stopped. Heavy silence fell over the house, broken only by the relentless drumming of rain on the roof and the ragged sound of Warren's breathing in the hallway. Then she heard it, the slow, deliberate squeak of the floorboards. He had left her mother's room. He was walking toward hers. "Where are you hiding, little mouse?" The words were a whisper, soft and venomous. He knew, somehow in his drug-addled state, that he had realized the house wasn't empty. He had figured out that someone else was here. Lily's bedroom door was pushed open. It creaked loudly on its hinges, a sound that seemed to echo through her entire body. She could see the faint beam of his flashlight sweeping across the gap beneath the closet door, illuminating the dust motes that danced in the air right in front of her face. He took a step into her room, then another. The floorboards groaned under his weight. "I know you're in here," Warren sneered. She could hear him tapping the crowbar against something, probably her bed frame. Clack, clack, clack. Each tap was like a countdown. "Come out now, and maybe I won't be so mad. Stay hidden, and I promise you'll regret it." Lily's chest was heaving. She was suffocating on her own panic, drowning in it. Her finger hovered over the glowing screen of her phone, ready to dial 911, even knowing they wouldn't arrive in time, even knowing it would probably just get her found faster. She prepared herself to scream, to fight, to do whatever she could to survive the next 30 seconds. Warren's boots stopped right in front of the closet. The flashlight beam vanished as he pressed his body against the slatted wood. Lily could hear him breathing now, a wet, ragged sound. Could smell him through the gaps, a mixture of sweat and chemical tang and something rotten. His hand gripped the doorknob. Suddenly a sound bled through the noise of the storm. It started as a low, guttural vibration, something that seemed to shake the very foundation of the farmhouse. It didn't sound like thunder. It was rhythmic, mechanical, angry. Warren paused, his hand still on the closet knob. He turned his head toward the window. The low vibration rapidly swelled into a deafening, thunderous roar. It was the sound of heavily modified V-twin engines, not one, not two, but a dozen of them pushing to the red line, tearing up the muddy driveway of the isolated property with a fury that matched the storm itself. Through the slats of the closet, Lily saw a blinding wash of white light flood her dark bedroom. A dozen high-beam motorcycle headlights swept across the front of the house, illuminating the rain in sharp, sideways sheets that looked like silver knives in the glare. Warren backed away from the closet, confusion temporarily overriding his malice. He walked over to the bedroom window and looked down into the front yard. What he saw made the blood drain from his face until he looked like a corpse. 12 massive custom Harley-Davidson motorcycles were arranged in a tight semicircle around the front porch, their engines idling with a menacing, uneven rhythm that shook the glass panes in their frames. Sitting astride them were men clad in soaked black leather and denim cuts. Even in the pouring rain, even through the distortion of water streaming down the window, the unmistakable skull and wings patches on their backs were visible. The Hells Angels had arrived. Before Warren could process the impossibility of what he was seeing, Bull kicked his kickstand down and dismounted. He didn't walk. He marched toward the front door with the unstoppable momentum of a freight train bearing down on a stalled car. Behind him, Reaper, Crusher, Scar, and the rest of the crew fell into line, pulling heavy steel flashlights, chains, and tools from their saddlebags. They moved like soldiers, like men who had done this before and would do it again. "What the hell?" Warren stammered, backing away from the window. All the swagger, all the violent confidence he'd carried into this house evaporated in an instant. He knew exactly who these men were. Everyone in Josephine County knew the Iron Horse, and he knew exactly what he owed them. Downstairs, the front porch groaned under the combined weight of the bikers. There was no knock. There was no announcement. There was no warning. With a deafening crash that rivaled the thunder outside Bull's heavy boot, connected with the front door, the deadbolt sheared entirely through the wooden door frame with a screech of tortured metal and splintering wood. The heavy oak door flew inward, slamming against the living room wall hard enough to punch a hole in the drywall. "Holloway!" Bull's roar echoed through the entire house, carrying a terrifying promise of violence that made the walls themselves seem to tremble. "Get your sorry ass down here right now!" Upstairs, Warren dropped the crowbar. The heavy iron tool hit the floor with a loud clang that seemed to seal his fate. His bravado vanished instantly, replaced by absolute paralyzing terror. He knew exactly who these men were. He knew exactly what he owed them. And he knew with crystal clarity that they did not make house calls just to talk. In the closet, Lily remained perfectly still, her heart hammering a wild rhythm against her ribs. The men from the text message had actually come. They were real. They were here. But as the heavy, thunderous footsteps of the outlaws began to ascend the staircase, as their voices filled the house with promises of retribution, she realized she had absolutely no idea what was about to happen next. The heavy thud of boots on the bottom steps sounded like a death knell to Warren Holloway. He stood paralyzed in Lily's bedroom, the crowbar at his feet. The farmhouse had transformed into a trap, and he was the cornered animal. Bull's voice rumbled from below. "Patch check the kitchen, scar perimeter. Crusher Reaper, you're with me." Warren's eye darted wildly. The window was a 2-story drop into mud and waiting outlaws. The hallway was cut off by ascending boots. His drug-fueled confidence evaporated, replaced by shivering panic. "Warren," Reaper's voice boomed, 10 seconds to walk out with your hands up or we drag you down by your teeth." In the closet, Lily pressed her hands over her ears, shaking. These were her rescuers, outlaws, criminals, the kind of men her mother warned her about, and they had come. 5 seconds, Holloway! Warren lunged for the crowbar. Before his hand lifted it, Crusher filled the doorway. The massive biker crossed the room in 2 strides. His shoulder drove into Warren's chest like a battering ram, lifting him off his feet and slamming him into the drywall. Plaster cracked. Warren's head snapped back. The crowbar clattered to the floor. "Thought you could swing on me, you rat!" Crusher growled, pinning Warren by the throat with one massive hand. Bull stepped in, eyes sweeping the room. He ignored the gasping man and looked toward the closet. Reaper. Everett Reaper Bishop walked in last. He stepped toward the closet, his boots carefully avoiding debris, broken frames, shattered glass, the wreckage of Warren's search. Reaper stopped a few feet from the doors. He could hear rapid, shallow breathing, terrified whimpers. He had a daughter once, remembered how fragile 15 could be, how big the world seemed when you couldn't control the threats. He took a deep breath, softening his posture, unzipped his cut to appear less threatening, slowly lowered to one knee, ignoring the protest of old injuries. "Lily." His voice, usually rough gravel, dropped to a gentle baritone. The voice he'd used when Magnolia had nightmares, a voice he hadn't used in over a decade. "Lily, my name is Reaper. I'm the guy you were texting." Inside the dark space, Lily squeezed her eyes shut. Couldn't answer. Her throat was sealed by fear and exhaustion. "I know you're terrified, sweetheart." Reaper continued, resting one tattooed hand gently on the slats. His skull ring caught faint light. "But the bad man is done. He's not going to hurt you. My brothers and I are here. We've got him." He pulled his burner phone from his pocket, held it to the crack in the door's screen, illuminating his weathered face. "Look through the slats, Lily. Look at the screen. You see the text, 'We are 5 minutes away.' That was me. You accidentally texted me instead of your brother Connor. But it's okay. We caught the message. You're safe now." Lily slowly lowered her hands, blinked against darkness, saw the phone screen, saw her frantic messages. And behind the phone, she saw the eyes of a man covered in scars and ink, but whose gaze held warmth, concern, protection. With a trembling hand, she pushed the bifold door. It squeaked open. Reaper didn't reach for her, stayed perfectly still, letting her choose. Lily crawled out from beneath the coats, face streaked with tears, clothes covered in dust, hair tangled, eyes red and swollen, small and fragile and exhausted. She looked at the giant man, then her eyes darted to Warren, still pinned against the wall, feet dangling. Her voice cracked. "He wanted my mom. He kept saying she took something." "I know, kiddo," Reaper said gently. He pulled a bandana from his pocket and offered it. "But he ain't getting anything tonight. You were incredibly brave. You did exactly the right thing." Lily took the bandana, wiping her face with shaking hands. The rough fabric smelled like motor oil and smoke, but it was real, solid, comforting. The adrenaline keeping her upright suddenly evaporated. Her knees buckled. Reaper caught her by the shoulders, steadying her with surprisingly gentle hands. "Easy now, I got you. Let's get you downstairs away from this mess." He stood slowly, guiding her toward the door, shielding her view of Warren. As they passed, Bull looked down at the terrified teenager. The intimidating sergeant-at-arms gave her a slow, reassuring nod. "You're under the protection of the Iron Horse Charter tonight, Miss Lily. Nobody touches you." Reaper guided her down the ruined staircase. The living room looked like a war zone. Shattered frames, overturned sofa, glass glittering like scattered diamonds. The back door hung crooked, rain pouring through the broken mudroom window. Several bikers stood guard, Patch sweeping a flashlight across darkness. 2 others by the front door, cuts dripping water. When Reaper brought her down, the room fell silent. The imposing outlaws stopped, averted their eyes or offered brief nods. A bizarre display of chivalry from men society deemed untouchable. Reaper led her to the only upright chair in the kitchen, pulling it out. He walked to the dented refrigerator, and retrieved water, popping the cap. Drink, sip it slow. Lily took the bottle with trembling hands. Upstairs, heavy struggle, a sharp cry of pain. Lily flinched, spilling water. Hey, look at me. Reaper pulled another chair, sitting backward at her eye level. Don't listen to that. That's club business. You focus on breathing. What time does your mom get off shift? 6 in the morning, she works pharmacy, double shift. Reaper nodded, pulling out his phone. What's her number? I'll call, let her know you're safe, tell her to come home. As Lily recited the number, heavy footsteps sounded. Bull and Crusher descended, half carrying Warren between them. His hands were bound with thick black zip ties. Nose bleeding, face colorless, like a man being led to the gallows. Crusher shoved Warren to his knees in the living room center. Keep him quiet, Bull snapped. Don't want the kid hearing a word. Bull walked into the kitchen, pulling off wet gloves. He looked at Reaper, then Lily. The rough edges softened slightly. She okay? In shock but unhurt. No physical injuries. Bull crossed massive arms, looking back at kneeling Warren. His expression darkened. Turns out Warren wasn't just harassing her mother over a grudge. He was looking for something specific. Lily looked up, red-rimmed eyes wide. He kept asking for my mom, kept saying she owed him. Yeah, well, he's a liar. Bull reached into his vest, pulled out a small metal lockbox, dented and scarred. Crusher found this under your mom's mattress. Holloway told us upstairs he tracked your mother because she took something when he OD'd at the hospital last week. Lily stared. Recognition flashed. She'd seen it before. Her mother kept documents in it. But 2 days ago, she'd watched through her bedroom door as her mother locked something else inside, hands shaking, face pale. My mom, Lily's voice barely whispered. She found something in his pockets when they brought him to the ER. She told my aunt on the phone. She said Warren had a ledger, a little black book with names of people buying stolen prescription pills. She said a nurse was helping him steal them. The phone against Reaper's ear went to voicemail. Rebecca's voice, bright and professional. He lowered it, staring at Lily with intensity. A ledger. He looked at Bull. Something passed between them, silent communication from years riding together. Bull's eyes darkened with profound rage, temperature seeming to drop. The Hells Angels had their own businesses, their own gray spaces, but they despised prescription pills creeping into communities. Dirty, dishonorable trade destroying families, creating junkies who'd steal from their mothers. Everything the code stood against. And targeting a single mother and teenage girl to cover it up. That crossed a line the club did not forgive. Bull walked back into the living room, boots like thunderclaps. He stood over kneeling Warren, mountain of leather and muscle and contained violence. You brought your dirty pharmacy business to a house with a little girl. Bull said, voice dropping to terrifying whisper, carrying more menace than any shout. You broke in to steal a ledger to save your skin. You dragged us into it. Warren looked up, tears streaming through blood. Please, Bull, double what I owe, triple. Just let me walk. I'll leave the state. You'll never see me again. You're not walking anywhere, Crusher sneered, pressing a boot between Warren's shoulders. Bull turned back. Reaper, call sheriff's dispatch. Tell them break in at 4242 Pinecrest. Intruder subdued. Evidence of major narcotics ring at the regional hospital. Reaper nodded, already dialing. Lily watched these giant, terrifying men moving with purpose. The terror she'd felt in the closet was gone, replaced by surreal safety. These were outlaws, criminals. Yet they dropped everything in a torrential storm to save a girl they didn't know. Now protecting her mother from a violent drug dealer. A contradiction her mind couldn't process. But wrapped in Reaper's oversized cut draped over her shoulders, she knew she'd never forget this night. Never forget those engines roaring up the driveway. Never forget being found. Reaper finished the call. Deputy's on his way. 30, maybe 40 minutes. Storm's breaking. Your mom's phone goes straight to voicemail, probably turned off during shift. Lily nodded numbly. Everything felt distant, like watching through thick glass. 43 minutes later, flashing red and blue lights pierced the gloom. Storm had broken to steady drizzle, turning the world gray. 3 Josephine County cruisers fishtailed up the muddy driveway, light bars painting wet trees in frantic colors. Deputies spilled out hands on holstered sidearms, cautious. They stopped dead. 12 custom Harleys still parked in defensive semicircle, chrome gleaming. Leaning against them, smoking unbothered by rain or law, were a dozen fully patched Hell's Angels. Deputy Alan Miller, veteran with 22 years and graying crew cuts, stepped forward, hand on weapon. He knew Bull. Everyone in the department knew him. "Garrison, keep your hands where I can see them. What the hell is going on?" Bull stood on the ruined porch, massive frame backlit. He held the hands up, palms open, unarmed. "Relax, Miller. We ain't the problem. We're the neighborhood watch." Reaper emerged, hand on Lily's shoulder. He'd given her back his cut to wear over her mother's coat. It hung like a tent death's head patch, comically large against her small frame. When Miller saw the terrified, tear-stained teenage girl, his posture changed. Training and instinct kicked in. He holstered his weapon, jogged toward the porch. "Are you Lily Brennan?" Lily nodded, gripping the cut's edges. "Yes, sir." "Are you hurt? Did these men do something to you?" "No." Stronger than expected. She looked at Reaper, then Bull, then the dozen men standing in rain who came when a stranger called. "They saved my life. A man named Warren Holloway broke in. Had a crowbar. Looking for my mom. I texted the wrong number by accident. Texted Reaper instead of my brother. They came and stopped him." Miller blinked, looking from teenager to scarred, heavily tattooed Reaper. The idea of Hell's Angels rushing to aid a misdialed text was impossible. Violated everything he thought he knew. "Where is Holloway?" "Inside," Crusher said from the doorway, casually tossing the crowbar onto muddy grass. "Tied up like a Christmas ham. Ain't going anywhere." 2 deputies rushed past into the house. A moment later, one called out, voice tight. "We got him! Secured! Jesus Christ, he's heavily restrained." Bull walked to Miller, handed him the lockbox without ceremony. Holloway wasn't just terrorizing the kid. He was looking for this. Her mother works hospital pharmacy. Found his ledger when they brought him in after overdose. Details pill theft operation running out of the medical center. Holloway came to destroy evidence. Miller took the box, expression grim. He looked at Bull, the house Lily, standing small and shaken. "You boys are handing over a suspect in evidence. That's a first. We don't tolerate people bringing that poison into homes with kids," Bull said coldly, jaw like granite. "Holloway crossed a line. You handle legal. We handled immediate threat." Before Miller could respond, headlights swept up, moving fast and reckless. A beat-up sedan with cracked windshields slammed to a stop. Rebecca Brennan practically fell out, scrubs, soaked face masked in terror. Reaper had reached her at the hospital 20 minutes ago, saying only that Lily was safe, but she needed to come home immediately. Rebecca abandoned her shift, drove like a maniac through remaining storm. "Lily!" Rebecca screamed, running through mud, ignoring police, bikers, chaos. "Lily! Mom!" Lily lay. Let go of the railing, bolted down steps. They collided in the yard, falling to knees in wet grass, collapsing into desperate weeping embrace. Rebecca buried her face in her daughter's hair, whole body shaking with retroactive terror and overwhelming relief. She'd spent the drive imagining the worst, every nightmare a parent could have. But her daughter was alive, whole, safe. Reaper watched from the porch, tight knot in his chest slowly unwinding. He pulled out crushed cigarettes, lit one flame, casting harsh shadows. Tried not to think how long since he'd held his own daughter like that. Tried not to wonder if Magnolia would recognize him on the street. Miller approached slowly, giving them space. When Rebecca looked up, face streaked with tears and rain, she saw 12 bikers in a loose circle around her property, saw patches on backs, saw the kind of men society taught her to fear. She looked at Reaper, standing with cigarette between lips, face weathered and hard and covered in ink. Their eyes met across the yard. Rebecca didn't have words, couldn't find them through overwhelming gratitude and relief and love. But she mouthed 2 words, silent but clear. "Thank you." Reaper offered a slight, respectful nod, took a drag, looked away, uncomfortable with raw emotion. "Keep the doors locked, ma'am," he said gruffly, voice carrying. "And Lily, delete my number. You don't need it anymore." He walked down steps toward his bike, signaling others. Bull whistled sharply, two piercing notes, cutting through dying rain and crackling police radios. Instantly, men by motorcycles stood, cigarettes flicked into puddles. Kickstands kicked up with practiced synchronization. The roar of 12 massive engines coming to life drowned every other sound symphony of mechanical fury shaking ground and rattling windows. Reaper swung his leg over strapped helmet on twisted throttle. The beast beneath responded with a snarl that felt alive. Bull took point, leading the column away. Thunderous roar echoed off pine trees as they peeled out of muddy driveway headlights cutting paths through darkness. Within seconds, they'd vanished back into storm, leaving only fading echo of engines and lingering smell of exhaust. 3 days later, in sterile fluorescent-lit interrogation room, Warren Holloway sat handcuffed to steel table face, a palette of purple and yellow bruises. Across sat Sheriff Paul Donovan, 30 years on the badge, deep, weary understanding of darkness operating between law spaces. Between them sat the lockbox. Donovan pried open the bent latch with evidence shears. Inside, beneath Rebecca's documents, lay a small, black moleskin notebook, pages filled with cramped, frantic handwriting. "You want to tell me what's in here, Holloway, because if it's what I think, breaking and entering is the least of your worries." Warren swallowed hard, Adam's apple bobbing against bruised throat. Terror experienced at the Iron Horse's hands had broken something fundamental. He wasn't afraid of police. He was afraid of men in leather who promised they'd be waiting if he walked free. "It's everything. The inventory, buyer list, drop locations. I didn't run it, Sheriff. I swear, just a courier. Just moved product from pharmacy to streets." Donovan opened the notebook. His eyes scanned the first page, color draining. This wasn't small time. The ledger detailed thousands of pills, fentanyl patches, oxycodone, hospital-grade morphine, controlled amphetamines, systematic funnel running, 2 years worth millions. Then Donovan saw the initials authorizing phantom transfers. RC over and over, RC approved, RC transferred, RC authorized. "Richard Caldwell," Donovan whispered, stomach turning. "Dr. Richard Caldwell, chief of medicine, man who golfed with the mayor, pillar of the community. He's the architect," Warren whimpered, desperate to save himself. Rebecca Brennan, senior pharmacy tech, started asking questions about discrepancies. Caldwell realized she was getting close, so he had me intimidate her. Make her look crazy to HR, but when I overdosed, I had backup ledger in my jacket. She found it when they cut my clothes off. Took it to expose us. Donovan stared at the broken man. Magnitude was staggering, but one question kept circling. "The Hells Angels, Warren. Why did Bull and Reaper show up? They don't do pro bono security." Warren looked at cuffed hands. "I owed them money from a parts deal. Thought I could use pill money to pay off, but the club hates pill trade. They found out what I was doing, already hunting me. That girl texting them just gave them my exact location. 30 miles away, Iron Horse Clubhouse doors bolted against afternoon sun. Inside dimly lit bar, Reaper sat at scarred wooden table, methodically cleaning knuckles with worn cloth. But his mind was elsewhere, anchored to terrified eyes of a 15-year-old in a dark closet. Bull walked in, tossing newspaper on the table. Donovan processed Holloway. No bail. Word on scanner as feds mobilizing to raid hospital based on that ledger. Big case, national news big. "Good, takes heat off Brennan family." "Not necessarily," Bull said, pulling out chair. He leaned massive forearms on table. "Caldwell is desperate, rich, connected, friends in low places. If he knows Holloway's talking and Rebecca has the ledger, he's going to realize his life is over unless he eliminates loose ends before indictments drop." Reaper stopped moving, slowly looked at his sergeant-at-arms. "You think he'll make a play for the mother and daughter?" I think men in expensive suits facing 20 years do incredibly stupid, violent things. Cops have a cruiser drive past every 4 hours. That ain't stopping a dedicated professional. Caldwell has money to hire people who don't miss. Reaper's jaw clenched. The code was rigid. You handled your business. Didn't invite unnecessary heat. They'd done their part. Stopped immediate threat. Walking away was smart, safe. But Reaper remembered the text, "Please don't leave me." Remembered absolute terror radiating from Lily crawling out. He'd given his word the nightmare was over. She was under protection. To a man living outside law, his word was the only currency that mattered. Reaper stood tossing the cloth, grabbed his cut from the chair. "Where are you going?" Bull asked, though the slight smirk suggested he knew. "I told that kid she was under our protection. Didn't put a time limit on it. Get Crusher and Scar. We're going camping." On the third night of surveillance, at 2 in the morning, when the world was darkest and quietest, a sleek black SUV cut headlights a quarter-mile down from Brennan property. It rolled to silent stop near dense pine tree line bordering the farmhouse. 4 men stepped out into damp grass. Not erratic drifters like Warren, professionals. They moved with terrifying synchronized precision. Dark tactical gear suppressed firearms. Subtle hand signals learned in places where mistakes meant death. Dr. Richard Caldwell had drained offshore accounts to hire them. Cartel affiliated, best money could buy. Mission was simple. Ensure Rebecca Brennan never testified. Make it look like tragic home invasion. Clean, efficient, final. The lead operative, cold-eyed professional who'd hunted from Tijuana to Seattle, signaled his team to spread. 2 would breach back mudroom. 2 take front. Standard protocol. Overwhelming force. No survivors. They slipped into tree line, melting into shadows, boots making almost no sound on damp earth. They thought they were apex predators. Thought they owned the night. 70 yards away, perched in thick branches of massive oak, Crusher watched through military-grade thermal binoculars. 4 white silhouettes moved through neon green landscape, completely unaware they were observed. Crusher keyed the radio mic clip to his collar. "Reaper, we got company. 4 bogies, heavy arms, moving east perimeter." In his earpiece, Reaper's voice came back calm and cold. "Copy. Let them reach choke point. Don't let them reach porch. Lethal force authorized by charter." Down on the ground, Reaper and Bull merged with darkness behind rusted tractor shell near the house side. No colors tonight. Matte black clothing, faces painted with dark grease. Armed, not with chains, but with weapons rarely brought out. This wasn't intimidation. This was war. 2 hitmen approaching back doors stepped past the tractor, focused on dark farmhouse windows, mentally rehearsing entry movements, kill sequence. Bull moved like a ghost. Despite enormous size, he stepped from behind rusted metal with absolute silence, years making him quiet as smoke. Didn't speak, didn't announce. Simply reached out, grabbed trailing hitman by tactical vest back, yanking backward with industrial winch force. Before the man could register what was happening, before he could draw a breath to shout, Bull brought heavy steel grip down on skull base. The hitman dropped like a stone, instantly unconscious, crumpling into wet grass. Lead operative heard the soft thud. Instinct made him spin, suppressed submachine gun coming up fast and finger moving to trigger. He found himself staring into Reaper's weapon barrel black void, looking impossibly large in darkness. "Drop it," Reaper whispered, voice a terrifying hiss carrying more menace than any shout. "Or I put a hole in your chest so big the wind whistles through it." The professional hesitated a fraction of a second, calculating odds. In that microsecond, Crusher dropped from lower oak branches directly behind landing with hunting cat grace. His massive forearm wrapped around the hitman's throat in devastating chokehold. The mercenary kicked and thrashed expensive weapon, falling uselessly into mud training, failing against raw, brutal strength of a man who'd survived street fights and gang wars. Crusher held on with iron grip, counting seconds until the body in his arms went limp. Simultaneously at front, the other two mercenaries crept toward porch steps when heavy rhythmic sound echoed from Darkwood's left. Clack, clack, clack. It was Scar casually tapping solid iron wrench against tree trunk sound, carrying through still night air like a challenge. Two hitmen turned towards sound, raising weapons, training screaming. Something was wrong. They had walked into an ambush. As they turned, blinding spotlight mounted on hidden motorcycle violently snapped on, washing them in agonizingly bright white light, destroying night vision, leaving them blinded and helpless. "Welcome to Josephine County, boys," a voice rumbled from behind light. Three more Iron Horse members emerged from blinding glare, moving with purpose. Within 60 seconds, all four cartel operatives were disarmed, zip-tied, being dragged deep into woods far from Sleeping House, far from any ears that might hear what happened next. Inside Farmhouse, Rebecca and Lily slept on, completely unaware death had come calling and been turned away by men who kept promises, who lived by a code most of the world had forgotten, who understood sometimes justice wore leather and rode on two wheels into the storm. Reaper left bound hitmen in capable hands of his brothers, who'd ensure authorities received anonymous tip come morning. He had other business that couldn't wait for slow grinding wheels of justice. He rode alone through pre-dawn darkness, Harley cutting through mist remnants, clinging to valley roads like ghostly fingers. Engine's roar was only sound in the sleeping world, mechanical heartbeat matching cold fury pumping through his veins. Underground parking garage of regional hospital was nearly deserted at 4 in the morning. Fluorescent lights buzzed and flickered, casting harsh shadows between concrete pillars. Dr. Richard Caldwell walked toward his silver Mercedes, exhausted from long shift, mind vibrating with nervous energy as he waited for encrypted text confirming the job was done. Message that would tell him Rebecca Brennan and daughter were no longer problems. Message that would let him breathe again. He pressed unlock. Mercedes headlights flashed. Soft chirp of alarm disengaging echoed off concrete. As Caldwell reached for door handle, massive leather-clad arm shot from shadows between pillars. Reaper slammed the doctor against his luxury car with enough force to knock wind from lungs. Impact left a dent in door panel. Expensive metal buckled like tinfoil. Caldwell gasped for air, eyes going wide with terror as he took in the man pinning him. Reaper was wearing his colors, death's head grinning malevolently in harsh fluorescent light, face painted with dark greasy eyes, cold and empty as a shark's. "Dr. Caldwell," Reaper said, voice like gravel grinding against bone. "Who?" Caldwell struggled to speak, vocal cords paralyzed by fear. "What do you want?" "I want you to listen very carefully." Reaper leaned closer, smell of leather and motor oil and something ancient and dangerous filling Caldwell's senses. "Your four friends out on Pinecrest Road, currently tied to pine trees waiting for sheriff. They sang like canaries, Doc, told us everything. How much you paid them, what you wanted them to do." Caldwell's face turned the color of old newspaper. Blood drained so quickly he thought he might pass out. Knees buckled, but Reaper's forearm across throat kept him pinned upright. "Please," Caldwell whispered, tears springing. "I have money. I can pay you whatever you want. Name your price." Reaper shoved forearm harder against windpipe, cutting off pathetic pleading. "I don't want your dirty pill money. I'm here to deliver a message from Iron Horse Charter. Tomorrow morning, feds kick down your door. You know it. I know it. When they do, you're going to surrender. Plead guilty to every single charge. And you're going to leave Brennan family entirely out of your defense strategy." Reaper leaned even closer, so close Caldwell could see scars on his face lines carved by decades of violence and survival, could see his own terrified reflection in those cold, merciless eyes. "Because if you drag Rebecca or Lily through mud in court, if you mention their names in your statement, if you send anyone their way ever again, walls of a federal penitentiary will not protect you from us. We have brothers in every cell block in this country, in every prison, in every hole they could possibly put you. Do you understand me, Doctor?" Caldwell nodded frantically. Tears of absolute terror spilling, expensive suit rumpled, perfectly styled hair disheveled. All power and prestige accumulated over decades of climbing medical hierarchy meant nothing in this concrete tomb facing this man who operated outside every system Caldwell had ever known. "I understand," Caldwell sobbed. "I swear I understand. I'll plead guilty. Leave them alone, I promise." Reaper released him, stepping back, letting the doctor collapse against dented Mercedes. He looked at the pathetic, trembling architect of so much misery with utter disgust. "Make sure you do." Reaper turned, walked away, heavy boots echoing off concrete, mounted his waiting Harley engine, roaring to life with deafening blast, making Caldwell flinch and cover ears. Bike's headlight cut through darkness like a blade, and then he was gone, riding out into pre-dawn darkness, leaving behind a broken man who understood for the first time in his privileged life what it meant to be truly powerless. The wheels of justice turn slowly, but they grind exceedingly fine. It took 8 months for federal indictments to fully process for massive web of corruption Richard Caldwell had woven through regional hospital to be completely unraveled. Investigation revealed conspiracy stretching beyond anyone's estimates. 2 nurses, 3 pharmacy technicians, an administrator who falsified inventory reports, and at the center, the chief of medicine himself, the man supposed to heal, who instead profited from pain. True to terrified promise made in that parking garage, Caldwell didn't fight. He took a sweeping plea deal accepting 25 years in federal prison without single mention of Rebecca Brennan's involvement in exposing the ring. Prosecutors were confused by his cooperation, suspicious how easily he'd folded, but didn't look too hard at good fortune. They had their conviction, their press conference. Justice, at least on paper, had been served. But Warren Holloway was different. Desperate to avoid lengthy sentence for breaking and entering assault with deadly weapon attempted kidnapping, Warren's public defender insisted on taking the case to trial. Strategy was simple if morally bankrupt. Paint Warren a sick man who'd made terrible mistake, poor addict who'd simply gone to wrong house seeking help, and attack credibility of only witness who could place him there with violent intent. Attack a 15-year-old girl who'd been hiding in closet, terrified for her life. On a crisp Tuesday morning in October, Josephine County Courthouse was packed. Case had drawn significant local attention. Media had covered larger hospital scandal extensively, and Warren's trial was seen as final chapter in a story that had captivated the region for months. Rebecca Brennan sat in front row of gallery hand, gripping her daughters so tightly their knuckles had gone white. Lily looked different than that terrible night 8 months ago. Dark circles gone. She put on a few pounds, looked healthier, stronger, hair pulled back in neat ponytail. She wore simple blue dress her mother bought specifically for this day. But as she looked at Warren Holloway, sitting at defense table in borrowed suit, all cleaned up, attempting to look harmless, familiar chill crept up her spine. She remembered his voice in darkness, remembered his hand on closet doorknob, remembered thinking she was going to die. Defense attorney, slick, aggressive man named Thomas Peterson, stood to begin opening statement. His strategy was immediately clear from first words. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Peterson began, pacing in front of jury box with rehearsed casualness. "Prosecution will have you believe my client is a monster. They'll paint a picture of violent home invasion, terrified young girl, malicious intent, and criminal conspiracy. But I ask you to consider the source. The entire case relies on testimony of a 15-year-old girl who was admittedly hiding in dark closet during power outage. A girl who was panicked, disoriented, quite possibly mistaken about what she heard and saw." Peterson let that sink in, making eye contact with several jurors. Can we truly trust perception of a frightened teenager in the dark? Can we build conviction on memories formed under extreme duress? My client admits he was at property that night, admits he was intoxicated and confused. But prosecution wants you to believe he had violent intent based solely on unreliable testimony of child who couldn't possibly have understood what was actually happening. I intend to show you this case is built on sand, on fear, on misunderstanding. And I intend to vigorously cross-examine Miss Brennan to expose weaknesses in her story. Lily felt chest tighten. Mother squeezed harder. Peterson was going to humiliate her. Make it sound like she'd imagined everything, like she was hysterical little girl who couldn't tell reality from fantasy. She could already feel shame burning in cheeks, could already imagine questions designed to make her doubt herself, make jury doubt her. But then heavy double oak doors at courtroom back swung open with sound that cut through Peterson's speech like a knife. Entire gallery turned as one. Even judge paused, gavel hovering, every eye fixed on entrance. Walking through doorway were 12 massive men, not wearing leather cuts. Judge had strictly forbidden gang insignia, and they'd respected that boundary. Instead, they wore dark suits, straining against heavily muscled frames. Fabric pulled tight across shoulders, too broad arms, too thick. But tattoos were visible, creeping up necks, covering hands, telling stories of violence and survival in permanent ink. It was the entire Iron Horse Charter. Every member who'd ridden to Pinecrest Road that night, every man who'd promised Lily she was under their protection. Bull Garrison led the way, imposing frame, practically blocking light from hallway behind. Suit jacket looked like it might split if he moved too quickly. Behind him came Crusher Scar Patch, and bringing up rear, moving with quiet confidence of a man who had nothing left to prove, was Everett Reaper Bishop. They didn't say a word, didn't cause a scene, didn't make threats or gestures. They simply filed into last two rows of gallery footsteps, synchronized heavy thuds echoing off polished wood floors and high ceilings. They sat down as one, benches creaking under combined weight. They crossed arms, and they locked eyes, every single one dead on defense table. On Warren Holloway, on Thomas Peterson, on anyone thinking about hurting that girl again. Warren turned in his chair out of pure instinct, drawn by weight of those stairs. When he saw Bull sitting in back row, those cold gray eyes fixed on him with predator intensity, all color drained from his face. Every ounce of carefully constructed composure evaporated. He remembered. God, how he remembered. The farmhouse, iron grip, zip ties cutting wrists. Absolute certainty he was going to die that night. Terror that had broken something fundamental inside. Thomas Peterson, oblivious to his client's sudden panic attack, continued opening statement. We intend to cross-examine Miss Brennan vigorously. We intend to show her testimony is... He felt desperate, frantic tugging on suit jacket. Looked down in confusion to see Warren pulling with both hands, eyes wide, face pale and slick with sudden sweat. Stop, Warren hissed loud enough first row could hear. Don't ask her anything. Change the plea. Change the goddamn plea right now. Peterson blinked, completely thrown off rhythm. Mr. Holloway, we discussed this strategy extensively. We have to challenge witness credibility. It's our only... Look at back of room, you idiot, Warren croaked, voice cracking with barely suppressed terror. Hands shaking so badly he could barely maintain grip on Peterson's jacket. You see those men? You see them? Peterson turned, following his client's terrified gaze to back rows. He saw 12 men in suits, saw tattoos, saw the way they sat perfectly still, arms crossed, eyes locked forward with intensity that made air itself feel heavier. He saw a bull mountain of muscle and scar tissue staring at defense table with eyes promising violence if certain lines were crossed. And Peterson, despite all courtroom bravado and legal maneuvering, felt cold finger of fear trace down his spine. If you humiliate that girl, Warren whispered, voice raw with genuine terror, I won't survive my first night in county lockup. They'll be waiting. You understand, they'll be waiting. Change plea to guilty. Do it now. Sudden commotion at defense table brought proceedings to screeching halt. Judge Grayson leaned over bench, frowning deeply. Counselor, is there a problem? Peterson stood frozen for a long moment, hands still gripping, prepared notes carefully constructed opening statement, now completely derailed. He looked at terrified client, looked at 12 silent men in back rows, looked at Lily Brennan sitting small and scared in front row, waiting to be torn apart on stand. The message was loud and clear. It transcended boundaries of law and procedure and courtroom protocol. It was written in absolute stillness of those 12 men in weight of their stares in unspoken promise, hanging in air like smoke. Do not cross that line. Peterson cleared throat-adjusting tie with hand that trembled slightly. Your Honor, defense would like to request brief recess to confer with my client regarding potential change of plea. A murmur rippled through courtrooms, spreading like wildfire through packed gallery. Journalists in back rows grabbed phones. Spectators leaned forward. Prosecutor's stern woman named Jennifer Marsh looked up from notes in confusion. Rebecca Brennan let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for 8 months. Tears of profound relief sprang to her eyes. She pulled Lily into tight embrace, burying face in daughter's hair. Lily didn't look at defense table, didn't look at Warren or lawyer or judge. She turned her head slowly, looking past rows of spectators, past journalists and curious onlookers, searching through crowd until her eyes found him. Reaper was sitting in back row, massive tattooed hands resting on knees. Harsh overhead lighting highlighted every line and weathered face, every scar, every mark left by a life lived hard and without apology. Gray threading through beard caught light. He looked older than 48, looked tired, looked like a man who'd seen too much darkness and carried too many ghosts. But when his eyes met Lily's, something shifted. Hard edges softened almost imperceptibly. Cold, dangerous expression fixed on defense table melted away, replaced by something gentler, something almost paternal. Reaper didn't smile, didn't wave, didn't make any grand gesture. He simply offered slow, deliberate nod of profound respect, nod that acknowledged what she had survived, acknowledged her courage, acknowledged bond they'd formed in that terrible night when wrong number became right call. A nod that said, "You did good, kid. You're going to be okay." Lily felt tears streaming down cheeks, but she wasn't crying from fear anymore. These were different tears: relief, gratitude, understanding. She nodded back, small, shaky movement carrying weight of everything she couldn't put into words. Recess lasted exactly 11 minutes. When court reconvened, Thomas Peterson stood before judge with shoulders slightly slumped, fight visibly drained. Your Honor, after conferring with my client, defense wishes to change our plea. Mr. Warren Holloway pleads guilty to all charges: breaking and entering, assault with deadly weapon, attempted intimidation of witness. He pleads guilty and throws himself on mercy of court. Judge Grayson looked over, reading glasses, expression unreadable. Mr. Holloway, do you understand by pleading guilty, you're waiving right to trial, you're admitting to all charges as stated? Warren stood on shaking legs. Yes, Your Honor, I understand. And this is your decision made of your own free will without coercion. Warren glanced back at 12 men sitting silently. Yes, Your Honor, my own decision. Judge nodded slowly. Very well. Given severity of crimes and clear pattern of escalating violence, I hereby sentence Warren Holloway to 15 years in Oregon State Penitentiary to be served without possibility of parole for first 7 years. This court is adjourned. Gavel came down with final decisive crack. As courtroom began to clear, as deputies moved forward to take Warren back into custody, as journalists rushed out to file stories, 12 men in dark suits rose as one. They filed out through side exit, moving with same synchronized precision they'd shown entering. No fanfare, no victory celebration. They had done what they came to do. By the time Rebecca and Lily made it to courthouse steps, blinking in bright October sunlight, bikers were already gone. Parking lot where their motorcycles had been arranged in neat row was empty. But Lily could hear them in distance, that distinctive thunder of 12 Harley engines echoing up from valley below, carrying on wind like a promise, like a reminder. Rebecca put arm around daughter's shoulders as they stood on steps. You okay, sweetheart? Lily nodded, touching silver locket hanging around neck. Gift from mother on 16th birthday 3 months ago. Engraved inside were words that had become family motto, something they both clung to when nightmares still came in small hours. Guardian angels wear many faces. Yeah, Mom, Lily said softly, watching traffic flow past courthouse. Ordinary people living ordinary lives, unaware of extraordinary things that happen in shadows. I'm okay. 1 year later, on cool evening in early November, 16-year-old Lily Brennan stood in community center on east side of Josephine County, helping set up folding chairs for weekly meeting of domestic violence survivor support group. She'd started volunteering 6 months ago after school counselor suggested helping others might help process her own trauma. Counselor had been right. There was something healing about sharing her story with women who understood, about looking into eyes carrying same shadows she saw in her own mirror, about telling them again and again that survival was possible, that courage could be found in darkest places, that asking for help wasn't weakness. She'd even started speaking at local schools, sharing carefully edited version of her story. She never mentioned Hell's Angels by name, never violated strange unspoken agreement. But she talked about importance of safety plans, of trusting instincts, of reaching out when in danger, even if unsure anyone would answer. Her mother had been promoted to pharmacy supervisor. Investigation following Caldwell's conviction revealed how much Rebecca had risked by taking that ledger, how much courage it took standing up to corruption, even when it put her and daughter in danger. New hospital administration recognized that, respected it. Rebecca now helped train staff to recognize warning signs of drug diversion to protect patients and community from predators who wore white coats instead of leather. Brennan House on Pinecrest Road had been repaired, broken windows replaced, shattered frames reframed, dents in walls patched and painted. On surface, everything looked normal, safe, like that night had never happened. But Lily still kept phone charged 100% before bed, still checked locks twice before sleep, still sometimes woke in middle of night, heart racing, convinced she heard footsteps in hallway. Trauma, her therapist explained, didn't just go away. It became part of you. The key was learning to carry it without letting it define you. As Lily finished setting up last row of chairs, her phone buzzed. She pulled it out, expecting text from mother saying she'd be late picking up. Instead, it was news alert. Local Hells Angels charter hosts annual charity ride for domestic violence prevention. Proceeds to benefit County Women's Shelter. Lily clicked on article heart, suddenly beating faster. There was photo, 12 bikers standing with motorcycles in front of a county courthouse, holding oversized ceremonial check for $25,000. And there, in center of group arms, crossed expression, stern despite charitable setting, was Reaper. She studied his face in photograph zooming in on small screen. He looked same, maybe a little grayer, maybe a few more lines around eyes, but still solid, still present, still keeping promises. She wondered if he thought about that night as much as she did, wondered if he still had that burner phone, wondered if he'd deleted her number like he told her to, or if some small part kept it just in case. She would never know. That was part of the code, the unspoken understanding between them. Their worlds had intersected for one terrible, beautiful night. They had saved each other in ways that went deeper than surface rescue. And then they'd gone back to separate lives, carrying memory like a scar that had healed strong. Lily saved article to her phone and slipped it back in pocket. Tomorrow she decided she'd make donation to charity ride. Anonymous, of course. Just her way of paying forward the gift she'd been given. The gift of a second chance. 30 miles away in small apartment above motorcycle repair shop, Reaper sat at kitchen table staring at his own phone. But his screen showed something very different. A text message that had arrived 2 hours ago from number he hadn't seen in over a year. Number he'd deleted and re-uploaded from memory at least a dozen times, unable to fully let go. Message was short, just photograph and 3 words. Photograph showed young woman holding baby. Woman had Reaper's eyes, that same gray-blue color that looked like storm clouds over ocean. She had his stubborn jaw softened by mother's genetics, but still recognizable. Baby was wrapped in pink blanket, tiny and perfect, and completely unaware her photograph was being sent to a man who'd almost given up hoping for this moment. 3 words below photograph were simple. Dad meets Sophia. Reaper's hands shook as he held phone. He'd been staring at this message for 2 hours, unable to formulate response, terrified anything he said would be wrong, would push her away again, would waste this impossible second chance. Magnolia, his daughter. Ghost that had followed him for 12 years. She had found him. Or more accurately, she decided to let him be found. He thought about that night on Pinecrest Road. Thought about Lily crawling out of that closet terrified and brave and so impossibly young. Thought about how close he'd come to ignoring that text message, to deleting it and walking away. Thought about how one small choice, one moment of choosing to care instead of choosing to ignore, had changed everything. He had saved Lily that night, but in some strange circular way she had saved him too. Had reminded him that being a father, being a protector, being someone who showed up when they said they would was worth the risk, worth the pain, worth opening himself up to possible rejection. Reaper's thick fingers moved across phone's keyboard, typing slowly, carefully choosing each word like it mattered. Because it did. Because this was the most important message he might ever send. She's beautiful. Like her mother. When can I meet her? He hit send before he could second-guess himself, before fear and doubt and voice that told him he didn't deserve this could make him delete it. Response came back almost immediately. How about this weekend? I'm in Portland, not far from Yimpim. Reaper closed eyes, feeling something tight and painful in chest finally begin to loosen. Knot that had been there for over a decade, pulled so tight it had become part of his anatomy, was starting to unravel. He typed back, I'll be there. Thank you, Maggie. Thank you for this. He set phone down, walked to window, looking out over small town below. Lights were coming on in windows as families settled for evening. Dinner being served, homework being done. Ordinary rhythm of ordinary lives, kind of life he'd never thought he'd be allowed to touch again. Bull walked into apartment without knocking, carrying 2 six-packs and takeout bag. He took one look at Reaper's face and stopped. What happened? You look like you've seen a ghost. I did, Reaper said softly, not taking eyes off lights below. But I think maybe I'm getting a chance to make things right with him. Bull set food on table, walked over to stand beside his brother. Didn't ask for details, didn't pry. That wasn't how they worked. But he put a hand on Reaper's shoulder, solid grounding weight. That girl from Pinecrest, Bull said after a moment. Saw charity ride got mentioned in news. She's doing good. Yeah, she is. You ever think about reaching out, checking in? Reaper shook head. Wouldn't be right. She's got her life back. Doesn't need reminders of worst nights she ever lived. Better for her if we stay in past. Stay as stories she tells, not realities she has to deal with. Bull nodded slowly. Probably right. But I bet she thinks about us sometimes. Bet she wonders if we're still out there, keeping an eye on things. We are. We always will be. That's the code. They stood there in comfortable silence. Two men who'd lived hard lives and made harder choices, looking out at a world that would never fully understand them or the code they live by. A world that saw them as outlaws and criminals, never recognizing honor, that ran deeper than law loyalty, that transcended badges and courtrooms. Following Saturday, Reaper rode his Harley into Portland, heart pounding harder than in any fight, any confrontation, any dangerous situation he had ever faced. He pulled up in front of a modest apartment complex in quiet neighborhood, killed engine, sat there for a long moment, gathering courage. Door to ground floor apartment opened. Magnolia stepped out, older than his memories woman now, instead of girl. He'd lost. She was holding baby, that tiny bundle of pink blanket, and impossibly small fingers. Their eyes met across parking lot. Million words hung and unspoken between them. Apologies and accusations and explanations that would take years to fully unpack. But there would be time for that. Maybe. If he didn't screw this up. Reaper dismounted slowly, pulling off helmet. He took 3 steps toward them and stopped, unsure if he was allowed to come closer, unsure if he had earned that right. Magnolia smiled. It was tentative, fragile, but it was real. Hi, Dad, she said softly. Come meet your granddaughter. And as Everett Reaper Bishop walked across that parking lot toward his daughter and granddaughter he'd never expected to have, he thought about wrong numbers and right choices, about how salvation comes from strangest places, about how sometimes worst nights of your life plant seeds for best days still to come, about how a terrified 15-year-old girl in closet had accidentally texted him instead of her brother, and in doing so had reminded him that being a protector, being someone who shows up when world is falling apart, was who he was supposed to be all along. Sun was setting over Portland, painting sky in shades of orange and gold. In Josephine County, Lily Brennan was finishing volunteer shift hugging women who needed to hear that survival was possible, that courage could be found, that asking for help was bravest thing you could do. And somewhere between those 2 points, 12 motorcycles sat in various garages and parking lots waiting for next time they were needed. Because Iron Horse Charter was still there, still watching, still keeping promises made in darkness. In a world desperate for clear heroes and villains, for simple stories of good and evil, truth remain complicated and beautiful and messy. Night Lily Brennan misdialed a text message she didn't summon polished authority of law. She summoned chaotic, unforgiving force of outlaws who live by their own code. But when a child cried out in terror, those outlaws didn't hesitate. They rode into storm. They kept their word. They became exactly what they needed to be. True protectors come in many forms. Sometimes they wear badges and carry weight of law. Sometimes they wear black leather and ride heavy iron through rain, carrying weight of their own fierce code of honor. And sometimes when universe aligns just right, when one wrong number connects two worlds never meant to intersect, those protectors remind us that salvation doesn't always arrive the way we expect. Sometimes it arrives with thunder of engines and smell of motor oil, an unwavering commitment of men who understand protecting the innocent is worth any cost. The farmhouse on Pinecrest Road still stands. The Iron Horse Clubhouse still opens its doors. And somewhere between those two places, an unspoken promise endures. Guardian angels wear many faces. Sometimes they roar through darkness on two wheels instead of descending from heaven. But they answer when you call. They keep their promises. And that, in the end, is all that truly matters.